much for being here. It's super exciting to get an opportunity to talk a little bit about my new work with my fantastic colleagues who are also thinking about automated decision making and artificial intelligence and their effects on politics, public policy, and equity or inequity around the world. So I'm super thrilled to be here, super excited to see all of your faces. It is a gray, sort of nasty-ish little Tuesday, so I hope you're not just here because it's a little warmer in here. But if you are, that's okay too, because our work is so interesting that you will be enraptured by your experience here this afternoon. So I'm just going to start by talking a little bit about this project that I've been working on since 2020, Not a Number, Oral Histories of the Automated Welfare State. Global Histories of the Automated Welfare State. Because I think there's been so much really important, really incisive conversation about what I'm going to talk about as automated decision making, although often people use automated decision making and artificial intelligence interchangeably. That's the word I was looking for. So I'll talk a bit about them both. And there's been a lot of conversation, particularly about AI in the last several years. And I'm super proud to have contributed to that conversation sort of earlier in my career with this book, Automating Inequality, How High-Tech Tools Profile, Police, and Punish the Poor. If you don't know it, feel free to take a look. I do want that back. I'm stealing my book. Actually, you could probably steal that one because I think that's from... I think it's from the first run of that book where the pages were out of order. So if the pages are out of order, someone can keep it if they want it. And I'm super grateful that that book really took me to talk about the ideas in it and the history I tell and the stories of people who are directly affected that I tell really all over the world. But one of the things that happened when I was doing the sort of 2 years of events behind that book is that I realized there's some really important gaps in the conversations we were having around artificial intelligence and public policy, gaps that I think really still remain in research writing and organizing on the subject. So two big things that this new project are trying to address. One is that the conversation is really lacking explicit cross-national conversations, though there's been more and more work that is cited outside the United States and Europe, which is really important. It's rare that we're actually talking across national boundaries about the issues that AI raises for policymaking. And almost without exception, the work is missing the voices of those who are most directly impacted by the systems, particularly in the welfare state or in public assistance. So in response, my colleague Andrea Quijada from the University of New Mexico and I have been working since 2020 on an oral history project called Not a Number, Global Stories from the Automated Welfare State. And we're presenting these sort of unique and compelling stories of people who are most directly impacted by automating social insurance in their own words, and also uncovering and examining these global patterns I was mentioning earlier. So the questions that drive the project are really, what's it like on the ground to live through what is a materially and politically really consequential change that is largely invisible because it gets talked about and written about as mostly administrative, mostly bureaucratic, mostly technical change. Across countries and regions, what's the same in that experience and what's different? And how can we identify and share strategies for improved and accessible care in difficult and technologically mediated times? So we're super grateful for initial support from the Open Society Foundations for this, and we're doing the work in collaboration with an organization called Voice of Witness. Voice of Witness is a nonprofit that advances human rights by amplifying the voices of people impacted by and fighting against injustice. So their work and our project are driven by a belief in the transformative power of story, and also an approach that Voice of Witness calls cradle to now oral histories, meaning that we see the interactions that people have with the tools of the welfare state as just one aspect of their sort of richer, fascinating lives outside of those particular interactions. And I'm going to send around a second book. This is Voice of Witness's most recent mini collection, which are short oral histories from people's experience with COVID. So far we've collected 21 cradle to now narratives that touch on how new digital tools and social insurance are changing people's lives. And we've collected stories in Aotearoa, New Zealand, Australia, Colombia, Finland, Indonesia, Spain, the United Kingdom, and the United States. We're currently working on collecting or gathering narratives from Kenya and Uganda, and we're hoping to also include Mexico and the Philippines. And I wanted to just share 3 initial insights from that work with you. Just a note, in the Q&A, we might want to talk about the hows and whys of oral history. It's an odd method for political science, which is actually sort of like an annoyance of mine of why it's an odd method for political science. I'm not going to talk about that a lot in my comments right now, but I'm really excited to talk about it if you all are interested in it. So I just want to raise sort of three sort of big insights that are coming out of the initial research. The first is that there is a real tension sometimes between political will and automated processes. So for example, in Spain during COVID, they passed the Ingreso Mínimo Vital, which was a federal minimum income program that was supposed to be widely and quickly available in response to the pandemic. But automated processes really kept those benefits from getting to the people who needed them most. So in general, what we're seeing is that automated social insurance programs work best for those who are already best off inside those systems. Statistical methods like algorithmic decision making or AI are really by their nature better at dealing with averages and probabilities than individuals and outliers. So automated processes are particularly bad at handling people with multiple overlapping or complicated needs. Folks like caregivers, people with disabilities, those who've been marginalized by racial, ethnic, religious discrimination. And we had an administrator in Finland actually point out to us that those are the very people we should be building our social insurance programs for. Super interesting story from an administrator in Finland. I'm not going to talk about it today, but it's amazing. Okay, so our second insight is sort of the new dangers of humans in the loop. So we talk a lot about humans in the loop as a major safeguard against the sort of rampant use of automated processes. But a second insight that we found in this oral history collection gathering is that there absolutely remains a need for human interventions in so-called automated systems, or we actually are starting to talk about them as automating systems because they're all in process between truly analog and truly digital processes. But human in the loop solutions can also create really important and consequential new vulnerabilities. So for example, in Colombia, and this is Maria Medina, who is one of our Colombian narrators. She's from Villa de Leyva, Colombia. So in Colombia, there are house visits made by government representatives who are authorized to override the sort of categorical ranking that people get under a new system there called the CISPEN. And so someone who was first denied access to health insurance, for example, can request a reassessment. A human being will come to their house and reevaluate them, see if the assessment is off. So we found that really around the world, both official and unofficial people are assisting with helping people access systems and even with them being reevaluated. But what we found is that in-person networks and interactions, while in generally sort of positive, we're also finding that a sort of lively gray market has arisen to fill that gap. So in many of the countries where we've talked to folks, it's not just government employees who fill those gaps, but also sort of quasi-official, not entirely legal folks who offer help with automated processes to people who don't have access to the technology or don't necessarily have the forms of literacy that are valued by the government. And that, of course, opens up all kinds of issues about privacy, but I think more importantly, financial exploitation. I'm getting the hook, but I want to just share a quick excerpt from one of our stories so you get a sense of the narrator's voices, which is really kind of the point of this project. And what I want, the third point that I wanted to mention today is that automated eligibility can also mean automated unenrollment or automated recoupment of funds. So even though these tools are often talked about as providing quicker and easier access to resources, these tools can also take away resources from even more people even faster. And one of the stories that illustrates that and that we've gathered for the book so far is the story of Carlos. So Carlos is a Romani scrap collector that we met through ATD Corptomundo, and he's been struggling with finding appropriate housing for himself and his family for more than 15 years. He was, at the time that COVID arrived, living in multi-generational housing, which created all kinds of definitional issues in the electronic systems that assessed him for public benefits. And I just want you to hear a little bit from his mouth. So he'll be talking about the IMV, which is the Ingreso Mínimo Vital, which I talked about, the sort of basic income program I talked about earlier. So he says, while we waited for our IMV application to be approved, we were still receiving the renta minima, which is a local inclusion benefit managed by the Community of Madrid. Then in January 2021, I got a call on my cell phone. Our application had been approved. We would receive 450 euros a month. We got 450 in January, and then in February I went to the bank and I only had 60 euros, no IMV payment. So I made a lot of phone calls. There were days I called Social Security 100 times. Each time a different person would pick up the phone and offer different information. In the end, they paid me the 450 euros for several months. They gave it to us ex officio for the period from June to October. Then they told me they were going to take it away. I appealed. Seguridad Social never answered the appeal. So I filed a complaint in court and they gave me a trial date in 2023, 2 years away. Then in April, a letter arrived. They determined that I had to repay the 5 months rent minima I had received in 2020. Their system says that I was getting the IMV, and you can't get both the IMV and the renta at the same time, so I have to return the renta. 2,500 euros for June to October 2020, they say. We have to pay it back in one lump sum, or 100 euros every month. Trying to get the money back, they suddenly could move very fast. There will be consequences, obviously, if I don't make that payment. Dear God, I don't know if I'll be called before a judge or before the Treasury. We don't have the money. We don't have it. The IMV was launched in a completely new way during the pandemic. Before, it was difficult to access the administration. You had to go through a lot of steps, gather a lot of documentation. It resulted in tremendous physical and psychological fatigue and exhaustion. But since the pandemic, it's been much worse, because everything is electronic, and now we are just numbers.
Thank you. Stefan, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. All right, hello, my name is Stefan Kehlenbach. I'm a new faculty here at the Rockefeller School in the Department of Political Science. I'm a political theorist by training, and so as a new faculty, someone who's just sort of starting out on my research agenda, unfortunately don't have a cool book to hand out yet. It's coming. Check in like, I don't know, a couple of years. So rather than going over a specific project or a single idea, I thought I would spend some of this time going over what I think about as someone who describes themselves as a critical theorist of technology, and how this translates into some of my ongoing research, including the aforementioned in-progress book project, to maybe give an overview of how I approach this project and the sort of research that I do at its core. So yes, I'm here at Rockefeller College as a political theorist. So what that means is I focus on the broader, more abstract questions surrounding politics. And in the sort of tradition of political theory, what we tend to do is we tend to root these questions in texts. So, like I tell my grandmother, what I do is I read old books for a living. But that's not strictly true because I'm primarily interested in the social and political questions that emerge from the usage of modern technology. Technologies that include artificial intelligence, but also focusing on data and data collection, algorithms, algorithmic governance, and other forms of technology, and even the idea of technology itself, what we think about when we use the term. So this is sort of rooted in text, but it's also rooted in our lived experiences and the societies that we participate in. So what does it mean to do a critical theory of technology? What is this sort of methodological approach that I take? Well, again, critical theory is this sort of methodological description, and it mostly describes the folks in the text that I take inspiration from, people working in a philosophical tradition that draws its lineage from the post-war era in the 1960s, that's focused on critically examining society and politics to try to understand the major problems of today in new and theoretically grounded ways, while also sort of having an edge of trying to look at the way out and maybe see if there are ways out of our modern problems. I'd say this is less concerned with specific policy outcomes and more focused on thinking about problems in a new way, developing what I like to tell my students, a conceptual toolbox to try to help get us some new leverage or a new angle on a problem of today. So I take that approach and attempt to use it to understand technology. So this means I look at things like pervasive data collection or the use of predictive algorithms, both sort of driving what we call AI processes and technical mechanisms that are used to serve advertisements, that are used to manage populations, and could be even used in sort of overtly coercive ways by police departments and the military, and investigate how these technologies might be impacting us and our ability to act politically in new and unexpected ways. Sort of challenging a general notion that politics and technology are separate and that we can think of technology as a neutral actor. I argue that we cannot understand technology outside of the realm of politics, that it both engages with and is engaged by our political selves. And so one way that this is emergent is through, say, discussions of progress. And this is a sort of setup that I'm using in my book manuscript, where I'm trying to think through these questions of progress and technology as they relate to data collection, and the sort of mechanisms, artificial intelligence that comes out of this. So I think we like to think about technology as a thing that drives progress, and that it necessarily sort of pushes progress forward. But in some of my work, I ask if this is really as good of a thing that we might assume. How does technology perhaps hinder our political or social progress? How does it contest the idea of progress altogether? How are they both sort of ideological in multiple senses of the words? And so, yes, in my ongoing book project, I look at this in a specific way. There, I take up questions of data collection in what some scholars call datification, which is the turning of everything about us, all of our interactions in the world and online, into discrete pieces of data to be collected by companies and fed into large AIs or other algorithmic systems. So this is sort of the way that I think about this, is focusing on the backbone of AI, the sort of things that go into powering these systems, and how that powering of the backbone of AI has political impacts at a conceptual level, how it changes how we think about politics, how it changes the ways in which that we interact with politics, right? And so without getting super technical, and I'm happy to elaborate on this sort of move more, I think about how this creates a new form of what we might think of as us, as our existence, what some scholars have described as a data double, or a sort of secondary person made up of data. When all this information is collected about us, when it's stored in a big data set in a server farm somewhere, when it's used by AI to make particular decisions, like as my esteemed panelist has done such a good job of showing in the world. And so what does that mean for our conception of us, for our conception of ourselves? What does it mean when Google or Facebook or Target or whoever begin accessing that information and then acting upon it? When Google uses that information to, say, impact what kind of search results we get. When political parties use that information to create voter targeting lists and fundraising emails. When they use these lists to predict how they should govern. And so the key, I think, and the important elements of this is that when these mechanisms are acting upon this sort of data collection, these are not strictly us. or our sort of lived embodied selves. These collections of data are sort of like us, but not us. It's just information on a server with no feelings, no hopes and dreams, and in effect, no politics. But what happens to us, the physical embodied selves, when our data is treated as if it was us? How does it impact our ability to act and even think politically? What are the large power structures that are at play in these usages? And so ultimately, what I'm arguing to sort of wrap up is that it has a negative impact on our ability to define who we are and define what kind of society that we want to live in. And so, time's up. That's what I do, that's what I work on, and I'm really, really glad to be able to do this work here now at New Albany in Rockefeller College. Thank you.
Thank you. Should we pass the mouse and keyboard on the piece? You go to the folder. The folder that's right there. Yep. And the one, and then your PowerPoint screen.
So thank you very much, everyone, and thank you, Bikini and Stefan, for this inspiring words. So I think that maybe I will be a little different than them, mostly because I'm a public manager. I'm not a political scientist. So I'm one of those crazy, rational people that is trying to organize an irrational world under some rules of management. And then, in fact, what I want to share with you is a little bit of research that I have been doing in state and local governments who are trying to deal with these challenges, I would call them, to actually use this kind of information technologies like artificial intelligence to try to help themselves to be more effective and to solve some problems. And in doing so, I have been doing interviews, workshops, case studies for more years than I would like to count. I don't have any book because we don't write books. We public managers don't write books, but I have some papers written about these topics. And I also, well, I thought that it could be a good idea to start with a little thinking about what is AI, which is very well aligned with what Virginia was actually talking, because sometimes when we hear about AI, we think about so many different things, and people sometimes think on science fiction movies, and HAL, and all these robotic entities that will take over our lives. And I think that most academics agree that that will never happen, right? But then there is this other type of artificial intelligence that people call artificial general intelligence. And although I am in the group of people that believes that this will not happen, at least too soon, yesterday in the first AI symposium, some of the speakers were very optimistic, saying that this is already happening, meaning that we have an algorithm using some data in some domain and then transferring whatever they're learning in a domain to different domains, which is not only a little scary to me, but anyway, so some people is experimenting on those things. I think probably it won't happen too soon. There is a lot of applications on artificial narrow intelligence, which means so there is data in a specific domain, and then a computer learns something about it, finds some patterns, and then try to use those patterns to help people make decisions. And there is robotic process automation, and we use that all the time, So I get in my email, I'm running, and it suggests me little responses, Yes, I'll be there, thank you, something like that, And then that's not artificial intelligence, that's just like a little help. And most of the people is really, when we talk about artificial intelligence, we're talking about that artificial narrow intelligence. I think that's the most common thing, and for a long time, it's gonna be the most common thing. So what is the problem with AI? So I think that the problem with AI is that it is a very complex application that requires too many components, too many people, actually, too many voices to be heard, so that we can have a good application that actually works and solves the problems and help the right people. And when we have something like that, combined with the fact that, as Virginia was suggesting, so most of these are developing applications, meaning we do not have really a lot of fully developed examples, but little experiments here and there. So we tend to hear a lot of people like evangelists, saying, oh, this will save us, there's so many benefits. Yesterday somebody was saying, don't over-regulate, just let us go ahead, and we'll fix the world, Or, on the other hand, you have a lot of more dark, I think that I get, when I review papers for many different journals, and I get the evangelist kind of paper, or I get the dark side of artificial intelligence kind of paper. And when we have this division, mostly caused by the fact that we do not have a lot of detailed information of actual implementations, it's really difficult to figure out a way of doing it right? Because we're just learning. Another problem is that these applications are so complex and require so much data that we really need to figure out how to clean and integrate amazing amounts of data that come out from many different places in government. And my good friends in the private sector, they say, well, you require an enterprise view, And probably it's easier for FedEx to figure out what is the enterprise view. Probably it's easier to Walmart to figure out what is the enterprise view. But governments are so complex, So many different enterprises, so many different competing values. So figuring out what is that enterprise view within the government organization is really problematic. Just to give you an idea, a few years ago, I was trying to map out data management practices in state government. And I thought that after 20 interviews, we would figure out the things that they were doing with their data. And I couldn't believe when somebody was telling me, no, we need at least 100. And we have this concept of saturation when we do interviews, that we start listening to the same stories again and again. So we finally were able to do 80 interviews. And I was learning new things in the interview number 80. So meaning that the diversity of practices, the diversity of goals of all these organizations really make very difficult to have this enterprise view and to be able to have the capacity of building these applications. But anyways, even though we agree or disagree, the other problem with AI is that people is adopting AI, right? And we have many chatbots in many governments trying to help people. Yesterday, we were hearing in different languages, right? Making immediate translation of things. We have a lot of profiling systems, like the one that Virginia studies, that there are so many horror stories around those profiling applications in almost in any domain that I can think of. And managers like me are also trying to figure out how to use all these algorithms and predictions to actually be more proactive in how they approach, how they serve citizens on their needs. The second problem is that, so there's a lot of out-of-the-box applications. So there are so many entrepreneurs that promise governments and everyone, use my app, it will save you so many hours of effort. It will help you to do your job better, right? And they are not that expensive compared to the savings that they promise. So there is some sort of an easy adoption, but then there are very, very much uneven results, and there is sometimes, as Virginia was talking, erosion of value, right? People is not really getting what they need, and then people. Some of the managers that I know call this some sort of a productivity paradox, So we have a new technology that is supposed to help us to do better, but then when we use it, we are just messing up, right? And this has happened before. When personal computers came into wide use back in the 80s, so people was expecting all the productivity to go up very quickly, and it didn't, But it actually came up in the mid-90s, right? And then when the internet became public, everybody thought everyone is going to be so productive, and nobody was. But probably 10 years later, right? And then there's this lag, basically because organizations have new technologies, new tools, but they don't really know how to use them, right? So in the kind of work that I have been doing lately, so what I'm trying to figure out is what are those things that government organizations need to actually be able to take advantage of this new technology. And then we have, for sure, technology. Data, as we have listened, it's a key resource. They need people that know about technology, but also people that know about the business side, the services that we want to provide. And of course, the missing piece that nobody pays attention because unfortunately now we get paid for that is the governance of the whole system, right? How to involve all the voices, how to produce those standards that we need. And for a manager like myself, the major problem is where do I start, right? Because I have limited resources. So we are tending to start with some of these systems, buying them out of the box. And is that the best way to start? So probably no. So what I have done, and this is my last slide, is actually trying to build some conceptual simulation models that are trying to incorporate all these different factors. You have the 4 boxes over there, the box of the data and systems, the box of the human resources, the box of the technology resources. And through those interviews, I have been trying to calibrate this model to what would happen in a real organization, right? And then, according to these silly models that are not very reasonable just yet, because I don't have any full case to actually try to calibrate the model, right? But the good thinking of the people, if you will, actually suggests that starting by governance, the thing that nobody really cares about, is the best way to start, and investing in people. It is like, those are like the 2 key investments that we should be doing. And data would be the 3rd one, and the technology, or the big computers, the fast semiconductors are really the least important from the organization point of view, of course. I think